tension headaches, and I had my medication for my acid reflux. And I'm not that old. I just turned 40, but I was on. Yeah, but still, I've been on acid reflux medication for almost 20 years. Just genetically, we're predisposed to acid reflux in my family, and but a doctor's wife came to us one day after we had lice in the family and gave us a bottle of tea tree oil and said, "Here, use this. This will prevent them from coming back." And so we took note of it, and we knew it was a doctor's wife, and we took note of the brand, and we just started doing research. And you know, over the next year and 3 months, we've really changed what our medicine cabinet has in it. And we haven't been to the doctor other than checkups, and I am pro-Western medicine. I'm not crazy. We go to the doctor, we do all of those things, but we did take control more of our own health care and kind of just our own research on natural ways to solve problems that we never thought of before. And so we've been doing this for about a good year and a half now. And these classes we started up when we moved here about 5 months ago, and it's been fun just getting to know people in the community, and it's helped us with relationships and all kinds of things. So there's been lots of benefits to it, and we hope that it's a benefit to the community as well. And so tonight we're talking about the sugar effect, and this was really fun for me. I am a reader. I love studying. It's crazy, I know. But I feel like over the last 3 weeks, I probably have put in enough hours to really get a semester's worth of biochemistry at any college. And so it was interesting really delving into this. I had a base knowledge of the effects of sugar on our body, but I didn't really get a full understanding of it until I really delved into it. And it's interesting, from the history of sugar in our country and in the world, through the chemistry of it and how it works with our body, and the different types of sugar, and what's good, what's bad, how much is good, how much is not good. So it'll be interesting. So I hope to get this in 45 minutes, half hour, but it'll be interactive, so we'll be talking as we go along. So, oh, that is not a good picture. It looks so much better when it was on the iPad. Anyway, you can tell what that is. That's a grocery store and someone pushing a cart. Question, how many, percentage-wise, do you think, if you walk into a grocery store, the percentage of groceries that have sugar added to them?
90. Higher, probably. 95, I'll say. Probably 100.
Anybody else? It's a little lower than that, but still astonishing to me. So it's 80-20. 80% of the groceries in your store have sugar added to them in some form or fashion. And that's mostly the aisles in the middle of the store. Anything around the edges, you don't have a whole lot of sugar there. But anything in between there, it's chock full of sugar. And what do you think, when do you think that occurred? Anybody have an idea of when our grocery stores went from this idea of an 80-20?
When? You tell us.
Just a thought. It coincided with, we got some people coming in. Come on in!
I saw that on the History Channel.
You did?
One of those, channels that,
That does information on
yes.
that? Okay.
And it's,
Yeah. So there's a distinct point in our history where we moved really from probably 40% of our groceries having sugar added to 80%, and it happened within about a year and a half, 2-year process, two-year span. 1982.
Wow.
Do you know what was going on in 1982? We had a war on something in 1982. It was heart disease. And so the government decided to take on heart disease, and they decided to take on heart disease by eliminating something within our diet. Does anybody know what happened? Fat. So they went all out, war on fat. Do you know what happens when you take fat out of the content of food? How does your food taste when you take fat out of it? It is horrible. It tastes like cardboard. And so they had to do something to make the fat, if you take the fat out, you got to replace it with something. And so what do you replace it with? You replace it with something that's cheap. And you replace it with sugar. And this is something, and this is even before the advent of high fructose corn syrup, which we'll talk about tonight, which even made groceries cheaper. But that allowed big corporations to replace the fat content with something else and make it light. You remember everything was Entenmann's Light, or fat-free this, or fat-free that, and you still see it on the market today. You can't get rid of it. It's still out there. Light, or less calories, or whatever it might be, but it's still there. And if you look at the back of the label, you turn it over, and you look at the regular fatty version of something, and then you turn over a light version of it, the grams of fat, or the grams of sugar always go up. It's just the way it is, and that's why it doesn't taste that bad, and people have gotten used to it. Our bodies have gotten used to it. And so, since the 70s, you can see, so this is, and I'm going to have some graphs here today. So this is obesity. So the percentage of population aged 20 years and older, and the obesity from 1974. And so you see that about 12% of the population in 74, and here, between 80 and 84, this is when we introduced high fructose corn syrup into the market, and we replaced a lot of the fat in our food with sugar. And you can see the jump, and it's just continued to rise over the last 30 years or so. And that's not even even worse than that is the childhood obesity in this time frame. And 3.5% of the children were obese. And look at from 76 to 80. Look at, I mean, we're up to almost 20% of children have gotten obese in that time frame, just in the last 30 years. So what have we done? You know, and that was really what intrigued me is, okay, really, it's a delineation point. 1980, right there. We had to have done something, and it was this whole fight against heart disease, coronary heart disease, and they really pushed it. And then they realized, oh, well, it's kind of cheaper to make food if we just replace the sugar or replace the fat with the sugar. Man, we can feed the world, and that was kind of the idea. Along with Nixon's war on poverty, how do you get a lot of calories into people without increasing the price of things? Well, it's not fiber, it's not protein, it's not fats, it's sugar. Sugar's really cheap, and corn is even cheaper. And so we'll get to the advent of high fructose corn syrup. So now you see, so we went on this war against heart disease. Do you think did we defeat heart disease in this time frame? So this is interesting. This is the diabetes. So this is the epidemic. So 1980. Again, that marker, 1980. And look at, this is the rate of, and this is from the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, that's the rate of diabetes and where it's gone since 1980, and early onset diabetes. And so replacing sugar has done crazy things. This is interesting because this gives us the rate of cancer, so cancer has gone up. Now, heart disease sits, and it's been, the incidence of heart disease has stayed fairly constant. But the problem with that, the incidence of heart disease, is medical advances since 1980s have gone up. So statin drugs have been introduced to the market, so that's lowered the mortality rate. So it's almost what I would call, it's hidden. It's taken the symptoms, you've given people prescriptions for the symptoms of things, but you haven't got to the root of the problem. The problem is still there. In fact, the incidence of heart disease have stayed constant. One of the reasons they've stayed constant is because, well, we've also had a war on tobacco, and pretty much fought and won that war, which is a really good thing. But heart disease has stayed constant. How come heart disease has stayed constant? Well, they've just replaced tobacco with something else that's causing problems in our diet. And so the incidence have stayed the same. The mortality rate has gone down because we just have better drugs and we are able to keep people alive longer. Maybe the quality of life isn't as good, but we certainly have been able to keep people alive longer. Cancer has gone up. So why has cancer gone up since 1980, 1960s, 70s, 80s? It just keeps rising. So there has to be this, there has to be something that we're putting into our foods or something that we're doing that's causing all of these problems. So what have we done? So according to the USDA and FDA, Americans are consuming 280 more calories today than in 1980. Which you wouldn't think, that's not that big of a deal, right? I mean, 280 calories. But take that and times it by 365 days a year, and
So that's
you get
day.
that's a day.
All right, thanks.
And I maybe I didn't. Did I not put that in there?
No,
I didn't put
that's
that in
cool.
there. Yeah, 280 calories more per day.
And
Which-
sitting more.
What's that?
And sitting
Well,
more.
yes, and
Less
sitting more.
exercise.
So that also yes. So we're much more sedentary today than we were in 1980. The children are much more sedentary today than 1980. That's for sure. But the interesting thing is the makeup of the 280 calories. So because we had a war on fat, the average American has decreased their consumption of fats by 15%. So as a percentage of intake, we've decreased it. Proteins, we've decreased by 4.5%. So there's only one left. What does that leave? Anybody have an idea what it leaves? The other portion of food? Starch, yeah. So carbohydrates. We've increased our intake of carbohydrates by over 175 calories. So the makeup of those carbohydrates is interesting too. So because you have all different types of carbohydrates, or just sugars, right? So you can eat bread, for instance, and bread will turn into glucose. Okay, and we'll get into the makeup of sugars. But it isn't we didn't increase the amount of grains that we eat, whole grains that is. We've increased the amount of, one, refined sugars, high fructose corn syrup, and we've increased the amount of refined flour that we eat. So between those three, we've added 175 calories of those three. Mainly 100 of those calories, actually 120 of those calories, in added sugar, sucrose, which would be table sugar, and high fructose corn syrup. 100 calories per day. You wouldn't think that's much, but average American has increased body weight and body mass by 25 pounds since 1980. So that's the average increase across the board, 25 pounds. And the makeup of those pounds, 17.8 of those pounds have been sugar, sucrose, or high fructose corn syrup. So that is what our cupboards look like today, for the most part. Most people's cupboards look like that. Anybody have a guess, wild stab at Campbell's tomato soup? How many grams of sugar are in a serving size of Campbell's tomato soup?
A bunch.
20,
A bunch.
You're close. You're not very far off.
25,
Go down a little bit.
24.
16. 16 grams. Anybody know how many grams are in a teaspoon? That's
10.
because people think, oh yeah, 4 grams of sugar. Who knows what 4 grams of sugar is? 1 teaspoon. That's the conversion rate. And The food lobbies have done a very, very good job of not putting anything in teaspoons, because a teaspoon you can kind of visualize. You know what a teaspoon is.
Right.
People don't know what a gram is. Who knows what a gram is? I mean, you can look and you say, oh, 33 grams of sugar. That seems to be a lot of sugar. Well, of course, 33 grams is a lot of sugar. Divide that by 4, and that's how many teaspoons you're eating. The World Health Organization, which I'm not a huge fan of, but they suggest that you should be eating no more than 6 teaspoons of sugar a day to stay healthy. And that was after lots of studies. That was a regressive study of 88 different studies put together, and they said, yeah, six teaspoons. That'll keep your weight at a. You'll be able to maintain weight, and you won't see any of the detrimental effects of sugar. 6 teaspoons. That's not much. Look at everything you eat in a day. Turn that label over and look. Just divide it by 4, and you'll hit it by breakfast. A lot of people. Most people will. I mean, Coca-Cola, I think, has, I want to say, 28 to 30 grams of sugar per 12-ounce can. And they don't serve 12-ounce cans very much anymore. Everything's in a 20-ounce can, right? In a 20-ounce bottle. Pretty much everything is. Yeah, you turn any of this over, and you'll hit it 1 or 2 cookies, and you're done. You're done. And it's probably high fructose corn syrup, which we'll get into the difference between them. So what is the difference? So sucrose. Sucrose is table sugar, and sucrose is what's called a disaccharide. Anybody know what the difference between a disaccharide and a monosaccharide is?
I don't even know what those are.
I know, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I didn't know either until a chemistry class at some point in life. Monosaccharide just means one molecule, right? Or, and the way that they're combined. So sucrose is 50% glucose, 50% fructose. That's what makes up table sugar. And so when you take a tablespoon or a teaspoon of sugar and you take it down, sorry about that, I should turn that off. You take a tablespoon of sugar, it goes into your stomach, goes into your small intestines, and in your small intestines it easily breaks up into those 2 molecules. So half of it is glucose, half of it is fructose. Well, glucose your body needs. Your body works. Every organ in your body, your skin, everything uses glucose for energy, right? And so it is totally necessary for you to have glucose in your diet. You will not live without glucose. Fructose, on the other hand, is only metabolized by your liver. Okay? So your liver is the only thing that can metabolize fructose. So you have a 50-50 split here. High fructose corn syrup. It is 58% glucose, 42% fructose. Well, this is great if everything had that ratio, because then you could actually metabolize it fairly well. The problem is, your sodas and pretty much everything that has high fructose corn syrup, it doesn't tell you which high fructose corn syrup it has in it, right? If you look at it, it just says corn sugar, high fructose corn syrup, something of that nature on the back. Most everything is this 45% glucose, 55% fructose. And that becomes a problem, and I'll show you in a little bit. There are certain things that are not as sweetened that they'll use this HFCS 42. So, like fruit cups, for instance. Like the fruit cups you get in the store, the Del Monte ones, they'll have high fructose corn syrup in it, and they're not as sweet. And so they'll use the 42-58 ratio because it's cheaper. High fructose corn syrup is much cheaper than table sugar, or raw sugar. And so it just makes sense for them from an economic standpoint to fill it with high fructose corn syrup. Fructose is 1.5 times sweeter than actually glucose. And so the sweetening properties of it, and that's why companies will use it. Do they use And even though high fructose corn syrup or fructose is more sweet, they still use the same amount. And in fact, there are different ratios coming out where Japan has now said they have a 90-10 mix of fructose and glucose. So the amount that you need to use is less to sweeten it more. So that's from a scientific standpoint, that's how it works. Now this is a quick overview. So because glucose is used by every organ in your body and is needed for energy consumption, when it goes into your body and you're starting to metabolize it, if you took 120 calories of glucose, 1 calorie of that will be converted. After everything gets converted out, everything will be, you'll get 1 calorie of fat out of that. The rest will be stored in your liver as glycogen. You've heard of that. People who are hypoglycemic or hyperglycemic or however you want to say, that glycogen gets stored in your liver. Some of it gets sent out as triglycerides into your cells and gets stored as fat. 1 calorie of it does. Fructose, on the other hand, doesn't get used up by any other organ. It is only metabolized in the liver. And so, in the end, 40 calories gets turned into fat. And so you see the problem we have here. It's a volume issue. And so, we'll get slightly more into this as we move forward. Now that's a lot of chemistry there. But this is how fructose gets metabolized. And there's a couple of things that are really important when we move into this. As we move through the process that your liver takes to metabolize it, you'll see way up in the upper right-hand corner there, it says no control over leptin and insulin. It's really important because those two are hormones, right? And so when your blood sugar goes way up, insulin gets released from your pancreas, and it does the job of activating your glucose so that it can turn it into energy so you can use it, right? And your body and your organs use it. Fructose doesn't have that effect. Doesn't do that at all. And so insulin just sits there, doesn't get released. And if insulin doesn't get released, then another hormone doesn't get released because it's dependent on insulin, which is leptin. Anybody have an idea of what leptin does? No?
A chemical?
It is a chemical. It's a hormone. And it tells your brain that you are full. Okay? So leptin doesn't get released, and so you don't think you're full. And so you just keep eating. And so that's why there was an interesting study that was done where they fed kids a 12-ounce can of Coca-Cola, which had 145 calories in it, something like that. So they fed them this 12-ounce Coke, and then they said, okay, now we're going to take you to McDonald's, and we would like you to eat. You can eat whatever you want. And so this was a huge study that they did. And you would think because these children had the kids who had an extra 120 calories of Coca-Cola in their system would eat less because they've already had their calorie intake. So, you know, the second law of thermodynamics is, you know, calorie in, calorie out. You know, you just have to, that's the way that we've all been taught, right? You take a calorie in, you need to burn a calorie. That's how it works, right? Wrong. Because it suppressed insulin, fructose suppresses insulin, which doesn't allow leptin to be released. They don't know that they're not hungry anymore, and so they ate just as much. In fact, they ate more. And so the kids who had the Coca-Cola before, they ate more. And that's what fructose does, is it suppresses all of that, and then over time of suppression of that, you get something else, which is called hepatic insulin resistance, which is a precursor to, anybody know, when you type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes. And we, from 1980, prior to 1980, there were no cases of adolescents or children being pre-diabetic or diabetic at all. Post 1980, it's a huge problem. With the rise in obesity and with the rise in high fructose corn syrup and all of the added sugars, is now kids are becoming insulin resistant at 14, 15, 16 years old, which sets them up for a lifetime of issues, right? I mean, all kinds of issues. Another interesting thing that they found that fructose does, a byproduct of fructose, is this little thing right here, which is very low density lipoprotein. Anybody know what that is? This is VLDL. So you have LDL, right? And you have HDL. What's the good cholesterol? HDL. The doctor always says, but you know that there's two LDL cholesterols. There's a low density, and a very low density, and there's a high density. High density doesn't have a problem. You don't have an issue at high density because it flows right through your arteries. But low density has an issue because that's what gets trapped in your arteries. And you don't want a high LDL count, right? Well, guess what fructose gives off as a byproduct? Liver. VLDL. And so now we have, remember we talked about, we have kind of that leveling off of mortality rate with cardiovascular disease and things like that, and mortality. Well, now everybody's on some sort of statin drug. So that'll maintain their blood pressure, and you put stents in, and all kinds of stuff to correct the problem. But really, the problem is, we just don't get to the root of the problem. We haven't. And they're finally figuring it out. Like, I'm reading all of these journals, and everyone's coming out, yeah, sugar's bad, sugar's bad, sugar's bad. Well, yeah, but why is sugar bad? What's the reason that sugar's so bad for you? And these are the reason and they're finding out that it's not so much the glucose side of things, because the glucose, your body does a fairly good job of actually metabolizing it. But it's the fructose that is the problem. And so people will say, well, fructose is really just fruit sugars, right? And so, like, you'll look at, like, an apple or an orange or a kiwi or whatever. Those are loaded with fructose, right? Actually, they have fructose and sucrose in them, but fructose and glucose in them. But what's the difference between eating an orange and having a orange juice?
You get fiber with an orange.
Fiber with an orange. We stopped eating fiber. We eat like 5 grams of fiber a day as as Americans. Did you know that? Like 5 or 4 grams of fiber a day? Do you know how much we used to eat of fiber? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, when children understand that their body doesn't work right, if they're athletes, and we have athletes.
I already have it. I'm on a diet, and I have
No.
to take it more.
I know, but what I'm saying is youngsters, and our kids are the 80s, 90s, whatever. Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is they know their bodies, and they know that if I eat an orange, it's better than this, because their bodies didn't perform. If they ate X, Y, and Z, and I know our kids weren't great about that, but I'm just saying, so it's how they, Rick's not gonna help me, they knew, they knew,
Intuition.
at 6 years old, they knew they couldn't go ride that bicycle as far as the other guy if they didn't, and they're not health nuts, they just know what their body needs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so sad that we went away from that.
Yep.
And our grandkids don't know it, but our sons do.
Yeah.
So fiber and all that, they don't know, yeah, they do. But it's like, why do I feel better today because I ate an orange instead of I drank a glass of orange juice?
Right.
They know.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of that out there. So this education is phenomenal to teach to people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, I hope it gets
Yeah.
out, and it's
And it
fascinating.
will.
It's
It is
fascinating when you
fascinating.
look at it and you say, boy, that just makes sense. Everything seems to line up. Like when we started
Right.
putting this stuff in our food,
Right.
there seems to be so many detrimental
Something
effects.
wrong.
There's something wrong here. And so what is it? What is it that's wrong? It can't be the fat. We figured that out. We decreased the amount of fat by 14%. So it can't be the fat.
Right.
It's not the proteins. You know, we've taken that out. In fact,
Right.
we've taken most of the fat out of the animal stuff that we eat because
Right.
everything is lean, and which is fine. I think that's fine. I think you should get your fats from avocados and cashews, and
Yeah,
for
yeah,
the most part,
yeah.
in oils and things of that nature. So we haven't done that. But what have we done? My goodness, I remember. I'm a child of the '80s, and so I remember when I was a kid. If I was going to have soda of some kind, it was going to be for my birthday. And it was going to be with pizza, because those were the only times that we really had it in the house.
Right.
That was it. It was special, and that's when
Right.
we ate that kind of stuff. And today, it's the complete opposite of that. There's no apples in the home, but there is a plethora of orange juice, soda, anything that has refined, flour in it, and everything from the center of the grocery store, essentially. And all of it, for some reason, all of it has added sugar in it. And if you look at like a can of Coke, just turn the back of a can of Coke on it. And so you look at it and you say, oh, okay, so there's 140 calories in this, probably more, I don't know, I don't even look at a can of Coke. And they don't come in 12-ounce cans anymore, so it's got to be over 200. But if you turn it over and you look at that, and you look at the grams of sugar in it, probably 33, 37 grams of sugar in it, and then there's sodium there. So there's salt also in Coke. Well, why is there salt in Coke? And there's also caffeine in Coke, right? And so caffeine is anybody know what caffeine is? Call it. It starts with a D.
Diuretic.
Caffeine's a diuretic, right? And so what do diuretics do? And salt. What do those two do together? They make you thirsty, right? And then it's got fructose in it and the sugars in it. And so there's a reason that there's sodium in Coke. There's a
That's
reason
right.
that there's a caffeine amount in Coke. Because there's no reason to make it to quench your thirst. Because you need to sell more Coke. It just makes sense. I remember a doctor once saying, it's like drinking a can of pizza. When you look at the back of it, because even pizza these days has some sort of added sugar into it. And so it's just interesting that they've created this product that, one, isn't going to fill you up because of the fructose, because it's not going to tell your brain that you're full after 200 and some odd calories. You should be full after 200 and some odd calories, or start to feel full. Instead, it's the complete opposite of that. You just become more hungry after that.
Right.
And more thirsty. And so you down another Coke, and thinking that it's going to, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And by the time you're done, you've gotten 4 Cokes in, and now you've eaten something else. Go ahead, you were going to say something.
2 things.
Yeah.
Number 1, I want to ask you, how much fiber did we used to eat?
112 grams of fiber.
112 grams
Yeah.
versus 4.
4, yeah, we've gotten down to 4, which just tells us that everything that we're eating gets processed really fast. And that's why our blood sugar levels go. Insulin gets released. We're constantly on this roller coaster. And the fiber, what does the fiber do? Soluble and insoluble fiber. What does that do for your body when you're...
Helps you digest.
I mean, that's exactly what it does. That's why you have fiber products out on the market, because people... don't get fiber in anything that they eat anymore because people don't eat fruits and vegetables any longer, which give you the fiber that you need so that it will slow down the digestion, right? The process, and so that your body has the ability to absorb that fructose slower. And that glucose slower, so that your blood sugar doesn't go spike up and then spike down so quickly. It's fascinating. It's just nobody takes the time to actually think about it, about how your body works. Now, one of the last slides that I have, because we're kind of getting to the end here, is the effect that sugar has on your brain. And this is a brain scan, and I know it's not a great picture, but so this is a normal brain, and these are the reward centers of your brain, right? So this is the part that releases dopamine, which when dopamine is released, it's that reward center of your brain, and it feels good, right? The happy feeling that you get. Over time, what happens to a cocaine addict? Because dopamine gives you that rise, and what does it do here? You can see it. The red indicates that it's being charged, and that the neurons are firing and saying, hey, that feels really good. I like that, I like that, I like that. When a cocaine addict, you have to do more cocaine or do more narcotics for you to get that same release of that hormone so that you feel good, right? And so that's the problem with withdrawal, right? Is that you get addicted to it, and over time, you have to keep doing more and more and more and more and more and more. Well, they found that sugar does the exact same thing. It has the exact same effect on. And if you watch, one of the myths, great myths, is that children, when they eat sugar, they get hyper, right? Everyone says, don't feed that kid sugar. It's a myth. It's not the sugar that makes them hyper. It's their brain knows that I get to have a cupcake. I talked to my kid the other day. We were talking about this, right, Karen, the other day? Is my son was so excited to go to Awana that night because there was going to be cupcakes there, and he could have a cupcake with sprinkles on it. And he was getting so excited about that. And so often we think that it's the opposite. It's the sugar that makes them hyper. No, it's the brain telling them sugar is awesome. I love sugar. It's great. I'm going to get hyper over sugar, and I'm going to just keep eating it. And so that's the effect that it has. It's the reward center. It's that idea that sugar is amazing, which it is. Sugar's great. It tastes really good. In fact, that goes back to when we were in this time where we needed a calorie boost. When we were hunters and we were gatherers, and calories were good and they were scarce and you couldn't get them. And so maybe 2 months out of the year when you could get fruit, you kind of loaded up on all the sugar and your body was able to handle that. Well, now calories are prevalent everywhere. You don't have to worry about hunting for your calories or doing anything like that. So that's why your brain tells you, calories, good, 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 good. I'm going to get a lot of calories quickly, and my body's going to handle it really well. But your body doesn't handle it well because we've just overloaded on it. You know? And so that's the effect that it has. Very much like any narcotic or anything we have. So what's the solution? So what do we do? What do you do?
Eat real food.
Eat real food. I'm not more. We don't have it down, that's for sure. Karen and I, when you go in our closet, and there's snack foods there, and there's ice cream
chocolate.
and there's dark chocolate. Which I guess there are some antioxidants in dark chocolate, but dark chocolate has a sugar content that is higher than milk chocolate. So just don't know if you know that, but it does. Most of them do, anyway. So, yeah, what do you do? I think, in my opinion,
Stevia is good.
yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot of research on stevia yet, but doesn't seem to have the same effect. You can metabolize it better, calories are way down, has a good sweetening effect to it. So some people really like the flavor of it. We haven't done a whole lot of stevia, and there hasn't been a whole lot of research on stevia yet, so we don't know. Kind of the jury's still out on that. 15 years from now, they might tell you that it's horrible for you and it's causing cancer. Who knows? But we know that the artificial sweeteners aren't good for you either.
Right.
Aspartame's horrible for you. I wouldn't worry about any of the other. The funny thing is that when we were doing this, I had 27 slides, and I had to cut it way down because we were way over. But another slide had on it the effects of, so we have other sugars out there, right? Lactose is a sugar. Anything ose is a sugar. So lactose, there's a lot of people who are lactose intolerant. I think you are lactose intolerant. But it's not very sweet. Your body handles lactose very well and metabolizes it much like glucose does. The one thing that fructose mimics almost identically, the way your body metabolizes it, except it doesn't have the acute effects, ethanol. Ethanol is alcohol, right? This is just sugar. And we have all kinds of laws and regulations that handle ethanol, right? I mean, you have a whole alcohol bureau, the tobacco, what's the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, right? They handle federal issues with alcohol because, one, it has an acute effect that fructose doesn't have, right? It can impair you, you drink too much of it, but the long-term chronic effects mimic, they're identical. So fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, heart problems, all of those. So fructose mimics ethanol from a chronic perspective. So that's amazing to me, but we don't regulate that at all. In fact, we give our kids 4 or 5 Cokes and say, but we wouldn't give them beer, right? You wouldn't give your kid a beer, but the chronic effect and the long-term effect of fructose and sugar is, we looked at this chart, it's identical, and something has to change. Which I'm confident, I feel good that I think things will change. But you don't know how fast, I guess. And just look at the label. Tomato soup, like Campbell's tomato soup, I never would have thought, never in a million years would have thought that there's 16 grams of sugar per serving in a Campbell's soup. 16 grams of sugar. That's, I don't know what that, 4 teaspoons.
And are there 2 servings in a can or 1?
That I couldn't tell you. It's either 1 or 2. But that's per serving.
But
So
what's a serving? A half a cup? Come on.
No, you really look at that, yeah. In all honesty. So, another thing I looked at, and I apologize, I need some water. Another thing I looked at, and I'll wrap up here soon. Another thing I looked at was they were comparing different foods. And so they had granola, Sunbelt granola, that was sweetened with honey, and Fruity Pebbles. Which one's worse? Fruity Pebbles or Sunbelt granola sweetened with honey?
Sweet with honey. I'm guessing the granola was worse.
By far. By far. 8 grams of sugar
Mm-hmm.
per serving in the Fruity Pebbles.
Mm-hmm.
24 grams of sugar in the Sunbelt granola
Mm-hmm.
that was sweetened with honey.
Right. Right.
What is
see
honey
me.
though?
Honey is sucrose.
Is pure sucrose?
No, fructose.
Oh,
but
it is
fructose-
Pure fructose?
Fructose is still 50% fructose, 50%
Right.
glucose.
Right.
Right.
And so you still, it doesn't really matter. So anything you look at that has sugar, the hype now is pure raw sugar or whatever it is, it's still 50-50. We're
Right.
still getting 50% fructose, which is the problem.
Right.
That's the issue right there. And honey's the same way. Now there are some benefits to local raw honey. And we talked about that last time. Allergy season comes along. Sweeten stuff with
Right.
honey
Right.
because that's going to help from an allergy perspective because it has all the
Right.
pathogens of the pollen that are out. So that'll help. But don't fool yourself into thinking, oh no, I'll sweeten with honey or agave or anything else because it's still 50%. But
Right.
stay way away from the sodas because those are most likely 50 to 65% high fructose corn syrup, and then 65% fructose.
Would you recap on why the high fructose corn syrup is so
so bad for us, for the ones that weren't here?
Yeah, so high fructose corn syrup isn't really just fructose. It's genetically, well not genetically, it's actually just lab modified. And so table sugar is made up of two molecules. Table sugar is made up of 1 part fructose, 1 part glucose. Okay, our body handles glucose very well, it does not handle fructose very well. High fructose corn syrup there's different ways that they modify it in a lab. So most anything that has corn syrup or high fructose corn syrup is usually a 55 to 45 ratio, sometimes higher fructose. And fructose we don't handle very well. And so anything like, so your sugary drinks, your apple juices, or your sodas, they're all that 55% fructose because it's cheaper to create fructose than it is to actually
You
and
said something
sweets.
about your brain, the fructose makes your brain not know that it's full?
No, it doesn't, because it doesn't release leptin. And leptin is the hormone that tells you that you're getting full.
Okay.
And so, because it's insulin resistant, it only gets metabolized in your liver. And so your liver, so your glucose level don't rise. I mean, you just don't, it doesn't tell your insulin to release. And so if your insulin doesn't release, your leptin doesn't release, which doesn't tell you that you're hungry. And then also creates insulin resistance because it's not being used properly.
Okay.
And so that's the high fructose corn syrup. But, I mean, in all honesty, there's not much of a difference between them.
45 to 55.
45 to
versus
55.
50 to 50.
Right.
I mean, it's still bad.
It's still bad, no matter what. It's just, you're in an extra. But don't think that they're not going to, because there's no laws that require them to tell them exactly which blend or which formula they're using for high fructose corn syrup. So, like, they could be using 65% fructose because it's sweeter and they use less of it. And so, I mean, who knows? You don't know what you're getting, and they don't have to put it on there. So.
Is there a comparison to the refined sugar to the raw?
No, not really. There's no
Sugary
difference.
sugar?
No, it's just like raw sugar is like brown sugar. Raw sugar usually is molasses is added to it, but from a chemical compound makeup, there's no difference. From raw sugar to pure cane sugar to beet sugar to anything that's extracted like that is going to be 50% fructose, 50% glucose.
Okay, what about the sugar in fruits?
But that's fructose, which is fine because you're also getting the fiber that comes along with it. So you're not going, and you're not eating, like for instance, like an 8-ounce glass of orange juice has about 4.5 to 5 navel medium oranges in it. Like that's the content of it. Okay? You're not going to eat 4.5 to 5 oranges in one sitting. You're just not going to do that. So it becomes a volume problem. But you certainly will you drink a small 8-ounce glass of orange juice. In fact, you probably could drink a 24-ounce glass of orange juice. But you would never, ever drink or eat that much oranges in one sitting. You just wouldn't. But that's the sugar content you're getting.
4 oranges.
In the glass.
Oranges, medium oranges in one